First, I want to thank you for getting out of your pajamas. Now, a couple of things before I start. Changed, obviously, cameras. So if you don't want to be seen on camera, sit where the Sheehan's are. This will be the last time they sit there. You can sit sort of along that edge and you won't be seen. We can't promise never, but you will not be. 98% of the time you would never be seen. Keep your mask on and they'll never know who you are, right? So you're good there. This side of the church is much more likely to be seen, so that's why you guys will be sitting over here shortly. So anyway, cameras, lights, oh my goodness. If one of you falls and gets a gash, I can stitch you up in the sanctuary now because I have enough light. It's like an operating room. Elliot is happy because he can see everything. And then the sound, we still have to tweak it a little bit. The sound system is, that was one of the things we had planned from early on, and it just coincided with our other, once we got the news, it coincided then with our other plans. But one of the great things that's going to happen, if you're not hearing me now, maybe you prefer it that way, but we said there seems to be a little bit of an echo or whatever, and we'll try to play with that. But if you have a hearing aid, or if you have hearing difficulties, we'll have a couple of things in the back, so you can just put them in your. It's not like big headphones; it'll be just a little. We don't have that part installed. We paid for it, but we haven't got that part installed. But then also, if you have a particular kind of hearing aid, you just be able to. I think it works with your phone. Something like it tunes into your phone can find the right frequency or the right something, or because I don't want to tell you this, but we have Wi-Fi in the church now. Now when I looked at you, you're like, oh, great. So note to Elliot, put a password on the Wi-Fi. Yeah, no, so so that'll be a nice thing for those who are hard of hearing. If yours works with your phone or tunes, has some special thing. Mine don't. I'd have to get another piece or something, but trust me, I don't need to hear myself, so. So that's kind of the news. Now, we're celebrating the feast of the Holy Trinity. A couple of things that I want to share with you about that. We all know that God is awesome, and by that, words are too small, and words cannot capture who God is or what God is all about. And we should meditate on this frequently. And it seems like every week I'm telling you should meditate on this frequently. So I hope that you're meditating frequently. And because these are the themes that actually enrich our soul, which then enriches our lives. These are the themes that when we meditate on, they change our perspective about everything, okay? And if we do not meditate on these themes, then we run the risk of not appreciating what God is doing in our lives, in the lives of others, in our world. We don't appreciate it. So when I say God is awesome, God is amazing, God is almighty, those are very real things. Those are the realities that underlie our little reality, and our understanding of the world and how we get along. So those realities of who God is underlie everything, right? So God is omnipotent. We know He's all-powerful. Now, try to imagine that. We understand power, of course. We don't have difficulty, understanding that concept of power. Powerful. That's something different, right? All powerful. So if you were to put your trust in me, many times you're going to find that I will come through for you, but not always. It's impossible for me to do that as a human being because I'm limited, but then also I'm sinful. I've shared with you many, many times, right? So you shouldn't have any illusions about that. But God, right? Have any of those limitations? Is that me or you? I mean, is that my battery or is that there? Like, anyway, you didn't hear it kind of coming in and out? Okay, it's just me losing my mind or my hearing quicker than I thought. But anyway, so God will never let you down. It's not within him to do that. That's difficult for us. That's not to say that God is always going to do what you want him to do. But God will never let you down, will always be trustworthy. God is omniscient, meaning that he knows everything. Sometimes silly people, they'll say, oh, I don't want to bother God with my prayers because he's busy doing about. Okay, so you have no idea who God is. You know, as if he were one of those old telephone operators, you know, trying to hook up calls and all that. Just so you have no idea who God is. God is more than capable to manage your life, my life, and a billion planets full of a billion people. When we say that he is all-powerful and omniscient, that's what it means, that he is capable of managing all of that, of knowing all of that, and accomplishing all of those things. Meditate on these things, we begin to understand that's why God is to be trusted, because he has the capabilities. God is also full of glory and majesty, and this means that there is something about God that is unique to God, that he is just awesome, not great and almighty and all. He's all of those things, but in himself he is also awesome. Have you ever seen something that was so beautiful you couldn't look away? Yes, you have, right? So, give you a little example. The other day, you know, sometimes it's a person, and I'm not saying in a sexual attraction kind of way. Sometimes you see a person, and you're just like, wow, that person is just beautiful, and you just want to stare at them, right? But just the other day, I was out riding my motorcycle, and I hit a spot in Andover, and I was on a gravel road, so you got to be really, really careful. You got to slow down to about 55, and so I'm going slowly, and I just came over this rise, and there in front of me was just this gorgeous view. You probably know it, right? I think it's Andover Road, or whatever, North Hill Road or something. So the signs kept changing. I didn't know where I was, to be honest. But I come over and I'm just like, oh, now that's a view. And I'm trying to balance between looking at the road and looking at, have you ever seen something that was so beautiful that you could not look away? Not yet. But I expect to. In God. So beautiful that you will not be able to look away. I was telling people the other day, saying that I was reading this thing about when the angels see Mary, when she sort of comes into their presence, however that works, they go into hers or whatever, they gasp because of her beauty. Right? And that's God's work, right? That's God's work. They gasp. Imagine not being able to look away because of the beauty of God. Now we begin to understand just a little bit more of who God is. Now, what's important, what I want to share with you and why is sort of doing that work, that groundwork, that foundational work of trying to understand who God is because God is so great that he cannot be fathomed. And one of the things that our world has done, and I imagine people have done it for for a long time, centuries, millennia, is that we make God small. And that's understandable in some ways because of who we are, but we make God small. We are not allowed to make God small. That's one of our faults and failings, because in a real way we're starting to rob God of his majesty. We're robbing God of his wonder. And people at times they say, what is this? Like the awe in the presence of God. One of the gifts of the Spirit is that awe and wonder in the presence of God. And it's part of the fear of the Lord. So, imagine God in all his awesomeness, and then one of his creatures is trying to make him small. Oh, it's not a good thing. Not a good thing. And why would you do that? It's one thing if you do it because you're not capable of understanding, but if you're doing it deliberately so that you can put him somewhere or manipulate him somehow, that's very dangerous. And it's interesting is because, I've had this ongoing meditation for a while about that first commandment. And how we view God determines everything else. How we treat God determines everything else after that. Right? So we should never try to limit God. One of the things I like to do is read the mystics, because there's a lot of good spiritual writing out there, and I read some of it from time to time. But the mystics, it's like, for somebody who's reading spiritual writing, it's like heroin, okay, or Coke, okay. It's just like, wow, it's like, wow. That is amazing. Like, this guy writes very nicely. Isn't that nice? Oh, the pastor's column, ooh, isn't that cute? But mystics, boom. And they have these experiences with God, and very often they have this exchange with God. It's just so instructive to me, anyway. Every once in a while, something happens in their lives, and they talk about it. And I see it from person to person to person, down through the centuries. So what happens occasionally is when this mystic, or later to be named saint kind of thing, says, sort of is getting frustrated or, angry with God's people or this kind of thing, there's something going on, some little drama going on, and they, in their minds and hearts, do what I was just talking about. They start to limit God. Now, how God often speaks to them is very gently. My child, my precious one, my beloved. Uses all of these terms. For different ones, it might be different, and he's talking to them in these very gentle ways. So you can imagine that sort of God comes to them, almost looking like a grandfather, because that's what they'll be able to accept. So you have this immense God he decides to become small. And that is the mystery of the incarnation. That Jesus abandons heaven and the Godhead and is born in Mary, right? And that is this great, and all the other mysteries that we come from that God deigned to become so small for us. So God limits himself. So very often that's what God is doing in his exchange with this person. He comes to talk to them, him or her. He comes to talk to him. And then all of a sudden, they say something that and all of a sudden he goes from being, like the little grandfather or whatever, or the loving friend, companion, to, and he just gets huge. And to a person, they describe it as being terrified. That's good for us to meditate on and think of. The reason why our God chooses to become small for us is because He loves us. And it shows the depth of His love. It shows how much He cares for us, so as not to frighten us away. It does not give us license to make God small. From that urge comes a lot of very serious sins and a path that you do not want to be on. It will not lead you to God. It will not bring you virtue or love or anything. So the first lesson is, God is awesome. Do not make Him less so, or struggle to make Him less. Strive to appreciate who He is and Himself, even though it is beyond you and me. But a reward is to be in the presence of a beauty from which we will not be able to turn away. The other thing is this, that as I told you, the reason God sort of becomes small for us is that He can teach us love. He can teach us how to truly love, to love Him and to love one another. And that is at the heart of who God is. We learn on this feast especially, right? Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, we understand that the very nature of God, the being of God is love. So He loves and is loved and is love itself, right? And from that comes everything. God does not need any of us or any of the worlds that He's created. He does not need the universe or however many universes He may have created. Any of His creatures. Doesn't need angels, doesn't need human beings, doesn't need anything. Perfectly satisfied and perfect in Himself. And yet, He shows love is always giving, right? Love is always generating. It always goes out and accomplishes something in the world. Whether it's in us or not, whether it's someone else or not, it always accomplishes something in the world. The love of God goes out, and it is not wasted or ineffective. If you want to be especially blessed, talk to God like that. It's like how you might talk to your grandmother or something. You say, Granny, if there's any cake left over, whatever it is. Okay, I know that my brother doesn't like strawberry shortcake, so if there's any strawberry shortcake left over, I wouldn't mind eating it. So you talk to God like that. You talk to God like that. You say, God, you are so loving and so wonderful and so awesome. If there's anybody that doesn't want to receive your gift or your love, I'll take it. Right? But anyway, so God's love goes out in the world and it is effective. right, in us. Now, we can be tempted, because we live in a world, we can be tempted to think that love is nice. It certainly is the most precious thing that we have, and we share it with family and friends, and that's a good thing. But it's limited, because we see in the world what really makes a difference is money and power, influence. Money, power, influence, all of those things, that seems to be what makes the world go round. People say things like, okay, we've tried that. We've tried being kind and loving. Now we're going to be violent and angry. As if it were more powerful. More powerful than God? Oh. Huh. We just talked about that. So somewhere in your mind, or my mind and my heart, I have decided are not effective. Don't ever do that. Don't ever do that. It's worse than turning back the strawberry shortcake. It's worse than walking to Granny and saying, your stuff is garbage. See? Now you understand. Oh, now I understand, Father. I didn't understand all that God stuff, but once you mentioned my grandmother. God is love. And the most powerful thing in the world is love. We live in God's world. He's created all of this. And He shares His goodness and His beauty, His wisdom, His truth, His glory with us. Today we acknowledge that God is great, God is awesome, God is wonderful. And His love is the most effective, the most beautiful thing in our world and in our lives.